A billionaire CEO saw a pregnant village woman sleeping on his boot. What happened will shock you. Inside a golden-lit penthouse, Daniel's glamorous girlfriend, Vanessa, sneered as she dropped her wine glass on the marble table. Vanessa, Daniel, you have money, but you have no heart. You're nothing but a machine that counts profits. Daniel's chest tightened. He tried to speak, but she picked up her purse and stormed out, heels echoing like insults. Alone, he whispered, Daniel, so this is what love thinks of me. The next morning, Daniel pulled into his company compound, his black Range Rover roaring like thunder. Staff bowed respectfully, but his eyes were stormy. He slammed the car door, files in hand, muttering under his breath, Daniel, they think money is everything, but money cannot buy peace. He strode into the building, leaving his car behind, its boot slightly open, unnoticed. Not far from the gates, a weary figure dragged her swollen feet. Grace, a heavily pregnant village woman, abandoned and alone, wiped her tears. Hungry, weak, helpless. Then her eyes caught sight of Daniel's luxury car. The boot was ajar, almost inviting. Clutching her belly, she whispered, Grace, God, forgive me, but I need rest. Slowly, she slipped inside the boot and curled up, her body trembling. The city roared on, but inside that silent car lay the beginning of a story that would shake everyone's heart. But what happens when the billionaire returns to his car and finds a stranger sleeping inside? Stay with me, because what follows will shock you. Daniel stormed out of his office, exhaustion written all over his face. His staff trailed behind him with documents, begging for signatures. He waved them off. Daniel, enough for today. I need silence. He reached his car, unaware of the fragile soul asleep in his boot. He pressed his keys, and the car beeped to life. Daniel opened the boot to grab his laptop bag, then froze. There, curled like a frightened child, was Grace. Her head rested against the leather lining, her arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Her breathing was slow, exhausted. Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. Daniel, whispering, what in God's name is this? Anger flared instantly. He shook the boot violently, shouting, Daniel, who are you? What gave you the right to touch my car? Grace stirred, her weak eyes blinking at the furious man towering over her. Grace coughed lightly, her voice trembling yet bold. Grace, don't shout at me. At least your car gave me the shelter my husband never did. Her words struck Daniel like a spear. For the first time in years, the billionaire found himself speechless. His chest tightened, but before he could answer, Grace suddenly clutched her belly, screaming in pain. Grace, my baby, it's coming. Daniel's jaw dropped. Staff gathered around, gasping, whispering, and recording the scene on their phones. For the first time, the proud billionaire looked helpless. Grace's scream echoed through the compound, startling everyone. Security guards rushed forward, while office staff gathered in shock. Some whispered, others recorded with their phones. Daniel's face turned pale as he stepped back, clutching his head. Daniel, no, this can't be happening in my car. But Grace's cries grew louder, her hands gripping her belly with unbearable pain. Daniel paced back and forth, files falling from his hand onto the ground. His workers expected him to order, to command, to act with authority. Yet he froze. For once, money had no meaning. Daniel, what do I do? Someone call a doctor. The crowd only stared. A proud billionaire, now trembling before a woman in labor. His heart pounded as Grace screamed again. Finally, Daniel forced himself forward. He bent down, lifted Grace into his arms, and carried her towards the driver's seat. Daniel, hold on. I'll take you to the hospital myself. Grace winced, barely whispering. Grace, why would you help me? Daniel clenched his jaw, starting the engine. Daniel, because no one else will. The car roared into the night, leaving the stunned crowd behind. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he sped through the busy Lego streets. The night traffic blared with horns, but he didn't care. Beside him, Grace groaned in pain, sweat dripping from her forehead. Grace, weakly, please, don't let me or my baby die. Daniel's heart pounded. He had never prayed before, but tonight, he muttered under his breath, "Daniel, God, just let her make it, please." As he drove, flashes of Vanessa's words pierced his mind. "You have no heart." He glanced at Grace, struggling to breathe, her hands clutching her belly. For the first time, he wondered if Vanessa was right. What good was wealth if he couldn't help someone right in front of him? Daniel thinking, if I fail this woman tonight, then maybe I truly am the heartless man she said I was. At last, he screeched into the hospital compound. Nurses rushed forward as Daniel jumped out and opened the passenger door. He carried Grace in his arms, his voice breaking. "Daniel, help her. She's in labor, please." The staff hurried her inside, while Daniel stood at the entrance, chest heaving, his suit drenched in sweat. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt powerless, yet strangely human. Daniel paced the hospital corridor like a restless lion. His phone buzzed with board meeting reminders, but he ignored them. His mind was trapped in that delivery room where Grace fought for her life and her babies. Staff and patients whispered, pointing, "Is that not Daniel Adewale, the billionaire? Why is he here, worried for a poor village woman?" Daniel buried his face in his hands. For the first time, the weight he carried was not business, but life. Suddenly, the hospital doors flung open. A man in dusty clothes, chest puffed with arrogance, stormed inside. It was Michael, Grace's estranged husband. He shouted at the nurses, "Michael, if anything happens to my wife or child, this hospital will regret it." Daniel froze, anger surging. "Wife." He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing at the man who had abandoned her. From the delivery room, Grace's pained voice broke through. "Grace, don't you dare call me your wife." The room went silent. Even the nurses paused. Grace, sweating and trembling, looked at Michael with burning eyes. "Grace, you abandoned me when I needed you most. You lost the right to stand by me." Michael's bravado melted. He lowered his head in shame, unable to reply. Daniel, standing nearby, clenched his fists. For the first time, he felt more than pity for Grace. He felt respect. Just as the tension with Michael lingered in the air, the hospital doors slid open again. This time, heels clicked on the tiled floor, and perfume filled the corridor. Vanessa, Daniel's ex-girlfriend, walked in, arm locked with a wealthy-looking man in designer Ibata. Gasps filled the hall. "Vanessa," mocking laugh Daniel. "Here. Oh my goodness, is this what you've become? From me to a beggar woman." She circled Daniel slowly, her voice dripping with scorn. "Vanessa, I left you because you had no heart. And now look, helping a nobody in rags. So pathetic." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes glanced at the maternity ward door, where Grace was still fighting. He whispered quietly to himself, "Daniel, this isn't about pride. This is about life." The longest night. Inside the maternity ward, Grace's cries echoed down the hall. Nurses rushed around, doctors shouted instructions, and the sound of medical instruments filled the air. She clutched the bed rails, sweat pouring, her body trembling from exhaustion. Grace, whispering, "God, give me strength for my child." Outside, Daniel paced like a man possessed, his expensive shoes clattering against the tiles. He muttered to himself over and over, "Daniel, she must survive. She must." Michael tried to act bold, but his hand shook as he sat down, head buried between his knees. Vanessa rolled her eyes, muttering insults, but the crowd ignored her. All eyes were on Daniel, this man of power, now pacing like a worried father. One old woman among the patients whispered, "Old woman, this is how God humbles the rich, to teach them the meaning of love." Daniel overheard, and for the first time, his eyes stung with unshed tears. Then suddenly, the corridor fell silent. For a moment, everyone froze. Then came a piercing sound, the cry of a newborn baby. Nurses cheered inside, and the doors burst open. A nurse stepped out, smiling with joy. "Nurse, mother and child are safe." Daniel exhaled, so deeply it felt like years of pain leaving his chest. His legs weakened, and he sat down, covering his face with his hands. relief, gratitude, and something he hadn't felt in years, peace. A mother's first touch. Grace lay weak but smiling as the nurse placed a tiny, wailing baby in her arms. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Grace, my child, my miracle." Her trembling hands stroked the baby's face. The room glowed with her joy, even though her body was still in pain. Around her bed, nurses smiled, moved by her strength. Michael stepped forward, eyes glistening, trying to claim a moment. "Michael, Grace, I was wrong. Please forgive me. Let me be the father to this child." Grace turned slowly, her smile fading. Her eyes burned with pain deeper than labor. "Grace, you abandoned me when I begged for food. You left me to suffer, to carry this child alone. You lost the right to call yourself his father." Michael staggered back, shame flooding his face. The crowd in the ward fell silent. Daniel stood in the corner, watching. He didn't speak, but his eyes were fixed on the tiny baby in Grace's arms. Something stirred in him, a crack in the wall of pride he had built around his heart. He whispered under his breath, "Daniel, so small, yet stronger than us all." For the first time in years, Daniel felt his broken heart beginning to heal, not through riches, but through compassion. The jealous outburst, the joy in the ward was interrupted by the sharp sound of Vanessa's voice. She stepped forward, her face twisted with disgust as she pointed at Grace. "Vanessa, this is madness. Daniel, look at you. A billionaire reduced to babysitting a village beggar. Have you lost your mind?" The baby whimpered at her harsh tone, and Grace clutched the child closer, her eyes filled with fear and anger. The hospital crowd stirred. Mothers, nurses, even patients exchanged angry glances. One man finally shouted, "Man, enough, woman. How dare you insult a mother who just gave life?" The nurse who had earlier spoken about compassion stepped forward again. "Nurse, Vanessa, your words only show emptiness. But tonight, this woman and this man," she pointed at Daniel, "have shown us what true wealth looks like." Applause erupted, echoing through the ward. Vanessa's arrogance faltered. Her new partner looked away, embarrassed. Daniel finally raised his voice, calm but commanding. "Daniel, Vanessa, you see weakness, but I see strength. You see poverty, but I see courage. Tonight, I learned what even billions could never teach me." Vanessa's lips trembled, but no words came. She realized the crowd no longer admired her. She turned sharply, dragging her partner out of the hospital, her heels clacking like defeat. The bond. Grace, still weak but glowing, looked up at Daniel. Slowly, she extended the baby toward him. "Grace, would you like to hold him?" Daniel froze. His hands trembled, but he reached out carefully. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, and for the first time in years, Daniel smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "Daniel, softly. He trusts me, without even knowing who I am." The room watched quietly as Daniel cradled the newborn. His sharp, business-hardened face softened. In those little eyes, he didn't see poverty or burden. He saw innocence, hope, and a chance at something new. Memories of Vanessa's cruel words echoed, but this time they felt powerless. "Daniel, thinking, she said I had no heart, but this child just proved her wrong." Grace wiped her tears, her voice steady despite her pain. "Grace, you didn't have to help me, yet you did. My child will one day know that a stranger with everything chose to save a woman with nothing." Daniel looked at her, speechless. Something deep inside told him this moment would mark the beginning of a new life, not just for Grace, but for him too. The father's claim. The silence of the ward was broken when Michael stood up from the corner where he had been sulking. His voice was loud, desperate, and shaky. "Michael, Grace, he may have money, but I am still your husband and that child is mine. No rich man can take my place." Gasps filled the room. Grace tightened her hold on the baby, her body trembling, not from weakness, but from anger. Grace turned toward him, her eyes sharp despite her frail state. "Grace, you abandoned me when I had no food, no shelter, no medicine. You called me a burden. Do you think fatherhood is just showing up at the hospital? No, Michael. A true father protects, even before the child is born. The crowd murmured in agreement. Michael's words seemed to shrink as her strength grew. Michael tried to move closer, but Daniel rose to his feet, placing himself between Michael and Grace. Daniel, if you cared, you'd have been here long ago. She needed you, but you left her. Don't pretend now. Michael's face darkened with shame. His lips moved as if to argue, but no sound came. He lowered his eyes, defeated by truth. In that moment, the entire ward saw it clearly. The billionaire who once lived for money alone now stood as a shield for a poor, abandoned woman and her child. Whispers of scandal. Outside the hospital, journalists gathered after catching wind of the chaos. Videos from staff and patients had already gone viral online. Daniel Adewale, the untouchable billionaire, carrying a poor pregnant woman into the hospital. Social media buzzed. Is the billionaire secretly in love with a village woman? Compassion or scandal? By morning, Daniel's name was everywhere, but not for business, this time for humanity. Daniel ignored his buzzing phone as he sat quietly near Grace's bed. Grace looked at him curiously. Grace, why risk your reputation for me? You don't even know me. Daniel sighed deeply, staring at the newborn in her arms. Daniel, maybe I needed to do this as much as you needed me. Sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. Grace blinked back tears, realizing his pain was deeper than his wealth could ever hide. Back in the waiting area, the whispers continued. Some staff admired Daniel. Nurse, he is a real man. Not because of money, but because of heart. Others doubted. Doctor, or maybe it's just pity. Billionaires don't change overnight. But one thing was certain. The story had already captured the city's attention, and Daniel could no longer hide from it. The broken heart revealed. A quiet confession. Night fell, and the hospital quieted. Grace's baby slept peacefully in her arms, while Daniel sat by the window, lost in thought. Grace studied him for a while before asking softly, Grace, why do your eyes look sad, even when you smile at my child? Daniel exhaled, long and heavy. For the first time, he dropped the mask. Daniel, because I've built empires, but I couldn't keep the woman I loved. She said I was too busy chasing money, that I had no heart. Grace's wisdom. Grace shifted gently, her voice calm but piercing. Grace, money is like a roof. It can cover you, but it cannot warm you. People don't leave because of poverty or riches. They leave when love is missing. Daniel looked at her, surprised. He had paid consultants millions for advice, yet here was a woman with nothing, teaching him what no money could buy. A silent healing. Daniel turned his gaze to the baby, sleeping soundly in Grace's arms. Something stirred deep within him, a peace he hadn't known in years. He whispered almost to himself, Daniel, maybe this child came into my life not by accident, but to remind me what really matters. Grace smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. For the first time, billionaire and beggar sat together not as opposites, but as two broken souls slowly finding healing. The pressure of society. The headlines. By the next morning, newspapers and TV stations were ablaze with headlines. Billionaire CEO rescues pregnant villager. Love or charity. Daniel Adewale in scandalous hospital drama. At his company headquarters, shareholders argued in anger. Some feared the news would damage their image, while others whispered that maybe, for the first time, Daniel looked human. Grace confronted. Back at the hospital, visitors who recognized Grace whispered behind her bed. Woman 1. She is lucky. From a poor hut to the arms of a billionaire. Woman 2. Or maybe she trapped him with her pregnancy. Women know how to play smart. Grace's eyes welled up with tears, but she held her baby tighter. She whispered to her child, Grace, you are not a trap, you are my blessing. Daniel's bold stand. Hearing the gossip, Daniel walked in, his face stern. He looked at the women and then at the nurses nearby. Daniel, let no one insult this woman in my presence again. She showed more strength last night than many men I know. The room fell silent. Grace looked at him, shocked by his public defense. For the first time, she realized Daniel wasn't just helping her out of pity. Something deeper was happening. A new path. The boardroom clash. At his company headquarters, Daniel sat before his board of directors. They were furious. Board member 1. Sir, your image is being dragged in the mud. This village woman scandal is bad for business. Board member 2. Investors are restless. You must distance yourself immediately. Daniel leaned back, calm but firm. Daniel, if being seen as human destroys business, then maybe I built the wrong kind of empire. The room went silent. For the first time, his wealth bowed to his conscience. A visit to Grace. Later, Daniel returned to the hospital. Grace was feeding her baby, humming softly. He paused at the doorway, watching quietly. The sight stirred something inside him, something warmer than power. Daniel, softly, you remind me of what money can't buy peace. Grace looked up, her eyes gentle. Grace, and you remind me that even the strong need healing. A choice unfolds. Daniel sat beside her, carefully watching the baby's tiny movements. He whispered, Daniel, I've made decisions that shape cities, but right now, I feel the biggest choice of my life is before me. Not about money, but about people. Grace studied him curiously, sensing the weight of his words. He wasn't just speaking of charity. He was speaking of a future. The declaration. A gathering crowd. Word spread that Daniel Adewale was still at the hospital. By evening, journalists, curious citizens, and even his employees filled the compound. Cameras flashed as people demanded answers. Reporter, Mr. Adewale, is it true you've abandoned business meetings to sit with a poor village woman? What exactly is going on? Daniel stood tall, his suit creased from sleepless nights, but his eyes burned with new fire. Daniel speaks. He raised his hand, silencing the noise. Daniel, yes, I am here, and I will not hide it. Last night, I realized something. Money without compassion is poverty. What use are my billions if I cannot help a woman in pain? What kind of man would I be? Gasps swept through the crowd. Some clapped instantly, others whispered in disbelief. The shockwave. Grace, sitting by the window inside, overheard every word. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she hugged her baby tighter. Michael, lurking in the background, clenched his fists, defeated, yet unable to walk away. Vanessa, watching the broadcast from afar, dropped her glass in shock. The man she once mocked for being heartless was now being praised for the very compassion she said he lacked. For the first time, Daniel had chosen people over power, and the world was listening. True riches. The quiet after the storm. Days later, the hospital grew calmer. The journalists had left, the whispers faded, but one truth remained. Daniel Adewale had changed. He sat by Grace's bedside one last time, watching her cradle her baby. Grace, I still don't understand why you chose to help me. Daniel smiled faintly. Daniel, because in saving you, I found myself. A farewell with gratitude. Grace stood weakly, her baby in her arms. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, Grace, thank you, Daniel. I came here abandoned, but I leave with hope. My child will one day know the kindness of a man who owed us nothing, yet gave us everything. Daniel nodded, his heart heavy yet healed. For once, he wasn't thinking of deals or profits, just the value of a single life. The final lesson. As he walked out of the hospital, staff and patients bowed their heads respectfully. Daniel turned, his voice steady but emotional. Daniel, remember this. True riches are not measured in money or cars, but in kindness, compassion, and the lives we touch. The crowd fell silent, moved to tears. Grace whispered a final prayer. Grace, God, bless the man who became human again. And with that, Daniel drove away, not just as a billionaire, but as a man reborn. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and what act of kindness inspired you today. Thanks for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change a life.